What if a billionaire CEO, known for his power and arrogance, disrespects the wrong person in a job interview? What happens when his condescending behavior triggers a shocking response? A slap that leaves him humiliated. As he grapples with his actions, can he find the courage to apologize and change? And when he discovers that his arrogance has led him to the one person who can make him rethink everything, will he risk everything for love? If this story kept you hooked, imagine what's coming next. Like and subscribe to stay connected with more intense, emotional, and gripping tales. Don't miss a single moment. Join our growing community today. Elliot Blackwood stood by the large windows of his sleek office, gazing down at the bustling city below. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow on the skyscrapers that stretched far into the horizon. He looked every bit the part of the ruthless billionaire CEO that he was. At 35, he had everything: wealth, power, influence. He ran Blackwood Enterprises with an iron fist, and no one dared challenge him. His reputation preceded him: sharp, calculating, and always one step ahead. Respect was something he commanded, not something he earned. For Elliot, the world was divided into two categories: those who were beneath him and those who served him. Today, however, was different. Today, Elliot would be conducting interviews for an important new role within the company. His firm was expanding, and he needed someone who could keep up with his pace, someone who could think on their feet. But, as usual, Elliot had no intention of actually respecting anyone who came through that door. In his eyes, most candidates were just a means to an end. Sophia Turner entered the room with a quiet confidence that immediately caught Elliot's attention. At 26, she had earned her MBA from one of the most prestigious universities, and she had built her own career from the ground up, with no family connections or wealthy benefactors to help her along the way. She was here to prove that she belonged in the world of powerful, influential people like Elliot. She was determined, smart, and full of ambition, but as she stepped inside, she quickly sensed something was off. Elliot's cold, indifferent gaze scanned her for a moment before he motioned to the chair across from him. There was no smile, no acknowledgement of her qualifications. She had been expecting a bit more respect. After all, this was a prestigious company, but instead, she was met with an air of superiority that made her feel small. "Please, have a seat," Elliot said, his voice as icy as his demeanor. Sophia sat down, trying to maintain her composure, but her confidence began to falter under his intense scrutiny. She took a deep breath, reminding herself of her capabilities. She wasn't going to let his attitude throw her off track. The interview started, and at first, it seemed like any other. Elliot asked the usual questions about her experience, her strengths, and her future aspirations. But it didn't take long before his behavior began to shift. His questions became more pointed, his tone more condescending. When Sophia spoke about her background in corporate strategy, Elliot cut her off with a dismissive laugh. "You're telling me you've led a project to increase revenue by 25% in your last job?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "That's impressive for someone in a junior position. But how do you expect to keep up here with the level of competition we deal with?" Sophia's face flushed. She had worked hard for everything she had achieved, and she wasn't about to let him belittle her accomplishments. She took a deep breath, resisting the urge to snap back at him. Instead, she calmly responded, "I've led teams through high-pressure situations and delivered results. I'm confident I can do the same here." But Elliot wasn't interested in hearing her response. He tilted his chair back slightly, his arms folded across his chest. "You know, someone like you, coming from a middle-class background, might find it difficult to adjust to the pace here. This isn't your typical 9-to-5 office job. We deal with high-stakes decisions, and not everyone can handle it." His words were laced with contempt, and Sophia felt a surge of anger rise in her chest. It wasn't just his arrogance that bothered her. It was his blatant disregard for people like her, people who had worked their way up from nothing. As the interview continued, Elliot's behavior only worsened. He mocked her responses, made snide comments about her clothes, and questioned whether she could really belong in a company like his. The final straw came when he dismissed her qualifications entirely, suggesting that she had only gotten her job offers because of her charm rather than her intellect. Sophia's patience wore thin. She had come here to prove herself, and now she was being treated like an inferior. The audacity of his words broke through the last barrier she had built to protect herself. Without thinking, she stood up, her voice shaking with anger. "I've had enough," she said, her voice cold. "You have no right to belittle me like this. I don't need to prove myself to someone who can't see beyond his own ego." Before Elliot could respond, Sophia raised her hand and slapped him hard across the face. The sound echoed in the room, and for a moment, everything was still. Elliot's eyes widened in shock, his mouth agape. The interview had ended, not with a handshake, but with a slap that reverberated through the cold silence of the room. Sophia turned and walked out of the room, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. The rest of the office staff stood frozen, watching her leave. No one said a word. Elliot, still in disbelief, sat motionless in his chair, his cheek burning from the impact of her slap. His mind raced, but the only thing that seemed to cut through the fog of anger was the surprising admiration he felt for her bravery. As the door shut behind her, Elliot found himself staring at the space she had just occupied, humiliated and speechless. It wasn't just the slap that stung, it was the realization that he had been wrong. In a single moment, Sophia had shattered the arrogant walls he had built around himself, forcing him to confront the person he had become. And deep down, though he would never admit it, something in him knew that this wasn't the last time he would think about her. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and business as usual, but Elliot's mind kept returning to the interview. He tried to push the thoughts away, but Sophia's courage, her fire, and her strength lingered in his thoughts. He had always prided himself on being the one in control, but in that moment, he had lost control, and it unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Elliot Blackwood spent the night staring at the ceiling of his expansive penthouse, unable to shake the vivid image of Sophia Turner walking out of the interview room, her back straight, her eyes filled with quiet defiance. The slap still burned on his cheek, and it wasn't just physical. It was the sting of his own ego being shattered in a way he had never experienced. He had humiliated her, dismissed her, treated her as if she were less than nothing, and all she had done was stand up for herself. A part of him respected that, but another part of him, his pride, wanted to deny the entire episode. He rolled over and looked at the clock on his nightstand. It was 3:27 a.m. The quiet of the city outside only amplified his restless thoughts. He could feel his anger rising again, but this time it wasn't directed at her. It was directed at himself. Why had he acted that way? Was it because he was used to power, used to controlling people and situations? Was he so consumed by his own status that he couldn't see the potential of someone like Sophia? Someone who didn't need to bow down to him? As the hours ticked by, Elliot's mind ran through every word he had said to her during the interview, every dismissive comment, every sarcastic remark. He realized in a moment of painful clarity that he had lost something more valuable than just a potential employee. He had lost an opportunity to meet someone who could bring real value to his company, someone with intelligence, resilience, and character. Sophia Turner could have been an asset, but his arrogance and disdain for anyone not from his world had clouded his judgment. His regret wasn't just about the business opportunity he had let slip away. It was about the way he had treated her as a person. Sophia hadn't deserved his disrespect. She had been professional, confident, and well-prepared. Yet he had treated her like she was nothing. What kind of man had he become? By dawn, Elliot had made a decision. He had to apologize. It wasn't something he was accustomed to doing. Apologizing was a sign of weakness in his world. But for the first time, he realized that humility was not weakness. It was strength. It was a mark of someone who had enough self-awareness to correct their mistakes. Sophia deserved an apology, and he owed her that much. As soon as the first light of day broke through the curtains, Elliot got out of bed and began his search. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling slightly as he typed her name into the search engine. The screen was filled with various articles and links related to her professional achievements. She had a stellar track record, impressive academic credentials, leadership roles in multiple projects, and recognition from her peers. His stomach churned with the realization that he had disrespected someone with such an impressive background. He took a deep breath and scrolled down. There it was, her LinkedIn profile. Elliot clicked on the link, his mind racing. Her contact information was private, of course, but he had money and resources, and with those, he could find almost anything. His company's connections, his wealth, and his position gave him access to a vast network of people who could track down someone's address if needed. He hated using his privilege for personal gain, but this time he was determined. He needed to make it right. By noon, he had her address. Later that evening, Elliot stood in front of the apartment complex where Sophia lived. His heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the entrance. The weight of what he was about to do pressed down on him. Should he knock? Was it too late to apologize? Would she even want to see him after what had happened? For the first time in his life, he felt vulnerable. He was Elliot Blackwood, the man who could get anything he wanted. Yet here he was, standing outside a modest apartment building, unsure of his next step. He was terrified of the possibility that Sophia might reject him outright or worse, not even answer the door. His hand hovered over the doorbell, his finger frozen in place. The thought of facing her again, especially after everything that had happened, felt overwhelming. He wasn't used to this feeling of doubt. He was used to being in control, not standing outside someone's door, unsure of whether or not they would welcome him in. Elliot exhaled deeply and stepped back, running a hand through his hair. What if she hated him? What if this was just a mistake, and he was wasting his time? Then something inside him clicked. She deserved to know that he was genuinely sorry. He had wronged her, and the least he could do was show up and offer a real apology. Not for business, not for his reputation, but because she was a person who deserved respect, and he had taken that away from her. He pressed the doorbell. His heart raced, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure what would happen next. The door opened, and there stood Sophia. She looked even more beautiful in person than he remembered, her features calm and composed, but there was a wariness in her eyes. "I didn't expect to see you," she said, her voice guarded. Elliot took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. "Sophia, I'm sorry. I've come to apologize for my actions. I was rude, disrespectful, and completely out of line during our interview. You didn't deserve that." Sophia didn't say anything at first, just stared at him for a moment. Elliot felt his palms sweat. Was this all for nothing? Finally, she spoke. "Why should I believe you?" she asked, her tone calm but piercing. "Because I've had time to think about it, and I realize how wrong I was. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I regret my behavior," Elliot said, his voice sincere. Sophia looked at him, her eyes searching his face. For a moment, she said nothing. The silence stretched between them, but Elliot didn't back away. He stood there, waiting for her response. Elliot stood at the foot of the apartment door, his hand raised in the air, hovering over the doorbell. The weight of the decision to knock was more than he had ever expected. He was used to being in control, to commanding rooms with his presence and decisions. But now, standing here, in front of the woman he had wronged so deeply, he was uncertain. Would she even open the door? He couldn't stop the rapid beating of his heart. His mind raced as he thought back to the previous night. His words, his actions, they all felt like a distant nightmare. The arrogance, the disrespect, none of it was worth the reputation he had built. Yet, here he was, standing at her doorstep, hoping to make amends. He took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours before the door creaked open. Sophia appeared in the doorway, her dark hair loosely falling over her shoulders. Her expression shifted instantly from surprise to guarded wariness as her eyes locked onto Elliot's. Sophia stood there, silent for a moment, taking in the sight of him. What was he doing here? Her heart fluttered, but she quickly buried it. She had no time for games. After everything that had happened, she wasn't about to open herself up again, not without knowing his intentions. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with suspicion. Elliot felt the weight of her gaze, the quiet challenge in her tone. He swallowed, trying to steady his racing pulse. This wasn't going to be easy. He had never stood before someone in such a vulnerable state. The ruthless CEO was gone, replaced by a man seeking forgiveness. He started, his voice faltering for a second, but he quickly regained control. "I came to apologize." Sophia raised an eyebrow, skeptical. She crossed her arms over her chest, her stance defensive. "Apologize?" she repeated, her tone cold. "For what exactly?" Elliot took a deep breath, meeting her gaze head-on. "For everything. For my attitude, for the way I treated you during the interview. I was disrespectful, arrogant, and I'm ashamed of how I acted." His voice wavered slightly, but he pushed forward. "I've spent the last day thinking about it, and I realized something important. Respect isn't something you can demand with wealth or power. It's earned, and I failed to earn yours." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't the man she had met yesterday. His words were soft, genuine even, and for a brief moment, she wondered if she had made a mistake by pushing him away. But she quickly dismissed the thought. This couldn't be real. "I don't know what you expect from me, Elliot," she said, her voice steady but distant. "I've heard countless apologies from people who've wronged me, and none of them meant anything. Why should yours be any different?" Elliot's shoulders slumped slightly, but his resolve remained. "Because I'm not asking for your forgiveness just for the sake of my reputation. I'm asking because I see now how wrong I was. I've spent my life surrounded by people who admire my success, but I've lost sight of what really matters. You showed me that yesterday when you slapped me." He paused, the memory of the sting on his cheek reminding him of how much he needed to change. "You stood up for yourself in a way no one has ever done before, and that made me realize just how far I've fallen." Sophia took a step back, still unsure of how to respond. She had never expected this kind of vulnerability from him. The man who had sat across from her in that interview room sneering at her was nowhere to be found. In his place stood someone who appeared genuinely remorseful, but her heart, still bruised from the events, was hesitant to trust him. "I don't know if I can believe you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't know what it's like to be on the receiving end of this kind of behavior. People like you, people with money, power, and status, think they can get away with anything, that they can treat others however they want." She swallowed, her throat tightening. "I've had to deal with that all my life, and I'm tired of it." Elliot's eyes softened as he listened to her. He could see the pain she was carrying, the anger that had been buried deep beneath her calm exterior. For the first time, he understood. He had been that person. He had been the one who judged others based on their circumstances. He had never seen the world through her eyes. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," Elliot said, his voice steady. "And I understand if you can't. But I needed you to know that I'm not the same person I was yesterday. I'm not asking you to forget what happened, but I am asking for a chance to show you that I've changed. You deserve better than what I gave you, and I want to prove that to you." Sophia stood still, processing his words. She wasn't sure what she had expected when he showed up at her door. Maybe an arrogant apology, full of excuses, just to save face. But this was different. There was no bravado in his voice, no prideful distance between them. He was asking for something she didn't know if she could give. She took a deep breath, her mind racing. Could she really trust him? Could she believe that a man like him, someone who had spent so much of his life ignoring others, could truly change? After a long silence, she finally spoke. "I'm not going to forgive you just because you apologized," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "But I appreciate that you came here. I appreciate that you're trying to make things right." She paused, looking at him with a mixture of wariness and hope. "But it's going to take time." Elliot nodded, a small but genuine smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I understand, and I'll give you all the time you need." Sophia stepped back, her posture still guarded, but her expression softened slightly. "I don't know what comes next," she said, her voice now more thoughtful than cold. "But I'm willing to hear you out." Elliot stood there, his heart lighter than it had been in days. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on the right path. He had made a mistake, but he was determined to make it right, no matter how long it took. The days following Elliot's apology felt like a slow, steady shift. At first, the distance between him and Sophia was as wide as it had ever been. She wasn't sure what she expected from him, but the gestures he made were unexpected. He didn't show up with lavish gifts or empty words. Instead, Elliot's apologies came in the form of small, meaningful actions. He started with a handwritten letter, neatly written, sincere, and humbling in its simplicity. In the letter, Elliot expressed his regret again, but it wasn't just about the interview. He wrote about how he had spent days thinking about the way he had treated people throughout his life. He spoke of his realization that power and wealth had distanced him from the very thing he wanted most: genuine connections. He had longed for something real, but in his pursuit of success, he had only built walls around himself. Sophia received the letter one evening after a long day of work. She stared at it for a while before opening it. There were no extravagant words, no over-the-top promises, just simple, heartfelt apologies. She wasn't sure if she should be touched or skeptical. She had heard so many apologies from people in the past, yet none of them had been backed by anything but empty words. But there was something about Elliot's letter that felt different. The next day, she found that Elliot had left a small book on her desk at work, one about leadership and personal growth. It wasn't the most expensive book, but it was a subject she was passionate about. No note, no explanation, just a quiet offering. Sophia felt a flicker of warmth inside, though she quickly dismissed it. "He's just trying to buy your forgiveness," she thought. "Don't let your guard down." But over the next few weeks, Elliot's efforts continued. He didn't overwhelm her, didn't push her to forgive him, or even to speak to him if she wasn't ready. Instead, he would occasionally appear at places she frequented, but always from a distance, never intruding. He would walk into the coffee shop where she worked on her laptop and simply offer a nod, or sit across the room without bothering her. Sometimes he would drop off lunch, something simple like her favorite sandwich or a fresh smoothie. Nothing grand or over the top, just thoughtful actions meant to show he respected her space and valued her as a person. Sophia couldn't ignore the change in him. His actions weren't those of a man trying to salvage his image. They were the actions of someone who was genuinely trying to make amends, someone who was learning that respect and kindness meant more than his wealth. Slowly, her walls began to come down. It wasn't easy. She'd been hurt before, and trust wasn't something she handed out freely. But every small gesture from Elliot was a step closer to understanding that maybe, just maybe, there was more to him than his previous arrogance. One evening, after a long, exhausting week, Sophia found herself sitting in the park near her apartment, her mind racing with conflicting emotions. She hadn't expected to see Elliot that evening, but as she looked up, she saw him walking toward her, his hands stuffed in the pockets of his coat. He paused when he reached her, offering a small, tentative smile. "I didn't want to intrude," he said, looking around at the empty benches. "I've been meaning to ask if you'd like to grab a coffee or something. If you're not too busy, of course." Sophia stared at him for a moment. There was no arrogance in his voice, no hidden agenda, just a simple invitation, a quiet hope that maybe she would allow him to sit with her for a while. She took a deep breath, considering his offer. Why not? It wasn't like she had anywhere to be. She had been thinking about the changes in him, wondering if they were real. This was her chance to find out. Sure, she said, standing up. But no fancy coffee shops. There's a little place around the corner. It's not much, but they make a good cup of coffee. Elliot smiled, his expression genuine. Sounds perfect. As they walked together, the conversation flowed naturally, surprisingly so. There was no forced small talk, no awkward silences. They spoke about their work, their dreams, their regrets, and their fears. For the first time, Sophia saw the vulnerability in Elliot that she had never expected. He admitted that his life had been consumed by success, his quest for power, his need to prove himself. But now, he was beginning to see that those things didn't bring him happiness. It was moments like these, small, simple moments, where he felt more connected to the world than he had in years. Sophia listened carefully, realizing just how much she had underestimated him. She had thought of Elliot as nothing more than a spoiled billionaire, someone who took everything for granted. But now, as she heard his words, she understood that he, too, had been searching for something real. She hadn't expected this side of him, and it made her question everything she thought she knew about him. I don't know why I'm telling you all of this, Elliot said, breaking the silence. I've spent so much time pretending to be this person who's untouchable, who doesn't need anyone. But it's a lie. I want to change, Sophia. I've already started changing, and I hope you can see that. Sophia didn't respond immediately. She was conflicted. His words, his sincerity, they were hard to ignore. She had built walls for so long, convinced herself that love and trust weren't worth the risk. But now, with Elliot sitting across from her, sharing his vulnerabilities, she couldn't help but wonder if she had been wrong all along. I don't know if I can trust you just yet, she said quietly, her eyes meeting his. But you're not who I thought you were. Elliot looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. I know, and I understand if you need time. I'm not expecting anything from you. I just wanted you to know that I'm here, and I'm trying to be better. Sophia felt a flicker of hope in her chest. There was something real here, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she couldn't deny the connection that was starting to form between them. As they finished their coffee, Sophia realized that her heart, once closed off and guarded, was beginning to open. Maybe, just maybe, there was room for Elliot in her life. Not as the arrogant billionaire he once was, but as the man who was willing to change. Months passed, and the connection between Sophia and Elliot grew stronger with each passing day. What had started as a hesitant truce, forged in the wake of an awkward and painful apology, had now blossomed into something deeper. Sophia found herself laughing more often, not just at Elliot's humor, but at the warmth he had brought into her life. She had seen the arrogance of the man he once was fade away, replaced by a genuine, humble soul who now cared about the world and the people around him in a way she hadn't expected. Elliot had shown her a side of himself that was raw, vulnerable, and real. His efforts, from thoughtful gifts to unannounced visits, were no longer a means to win her over. They were just expressions of his true feelings. He wasn't perfect, and she wasn't asking for perfection. She was beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, they were perfect for each other despite their flaws. Sophia had never been one to rush into relationships. Her past had taught her to be cautious, to guard her heart, and to avoid repeating mistakes. But as she spent more time with Elliot, she found herself letting go of the walls she had built around herself. She saw a man who had changed, not just for her, but for himself as well. Could she fully open her heart to him? She wasn't sure. But what she did know was that she was willing to try. One evening, As the sun began to set, and the streets of the city began to glow with the amber light of twilight, Elliot found himself pacing in front of a small, quiet cafe, a place he and Sophia had often frequented in the past few months. It wasn't fancy or grand, but it had become their place, a place where they could just be themselves, without the pressures of wealth or status. Elliot was nervous, a feeling he rarely experienced. This wasn't just about asking for forgiveness anymore. This was about making a choice that would change his life forever. He had always been someone who took charge, who made decisions with his mind. But this was different. This was about following his heart. Sophia arrived a few minutes later, her usual smile lighting up her face as she stepped inside. She greeted him with a quick kiss on the cheek, and they settled into their usual spot by the window. But tonight, something felt different. The air between them was filled with anticipation, a quiet tension that neither of them spoke about. "So, what's going on? You seem a little off tonight," Sophia observed, her brows furrowed with concern. Elliot took a deep breath. He had been rehearsing what he wanted to say for days, but now that the moment had arrived, his words felt inadequate. He had spent so long focused on business, on building his empire, that he had forgotten the importance of vulnerability and love. But he wasn't going to let that stop him now. "Sophia," he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "I've spent so many years thinking I knew what I wanted. I've always prided myself on having control, on being the one who makes the decisions. But in the time we've spent together, you've shown me something I never expected. You've shown me what it means to truly care about someone, to love without conditions. And I can't imagine my life without you in it." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. The words he spoke were simple but genuine, and they pierced through the guarded walls she had carefully constructed around her heart. She had been holding herself back, unsure of what to believe. But now, hearing him speak so honestly, she felt something shift inside her. Elliot paused, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "I'm not perfect, and I'll never be. But I want to spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you deserve. I don't want to just be the person you settled for. I want to be the person you can trust, the person who's there for you, no matter what. I want to love you, truly love you, for who you are, not for what you can offer me, but for everything that makes you, you." Sophia's eyes welled up with tears. She had spent so long protecting herself from the pain of rejection, from the hurt of falling in love with someone who wouldn't care for her in return. But here, in this moment, she realized that maybe she didn't have to protect herself anymore. Maybe love was worth the risk. Elliot reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a simple, yet elegant ring. Nothing extravagant, just a symbol of his commitment and love. "Sophia," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion, "will you marry me? Will you take this chance with me, and let me show you that the future we build together will be better than anything we could ever imagine apart?" Sophia looked down at the ring, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't the grand, lavish proposal she had once dreamed of, but it was real, just like everything else about their relationship. It wasn't about the perfect ring or the perfect moment. It was about the sincerity of his words and the authenticity of his feelings. It was about the man Elliot had become. She couldn't find the words at first. The emotion swelled inside her, and before she knew it, tears were streaming down her face. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed. But Elliot simply smiled, reaching across the table to take her hand. "You don't have to say anything right now," he said gently. "I just needed you to know how much you mean to me." But Sophia shook her head, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Elliot's face lit up, and he leaned across the table, lifting her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. For the first time in a long while, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He hadn't just asked her to marry him, he had asked her to build a future with him. And for the first time, he realized that this was the greatest decision he had ever made. The couple embraced, knowing that the path ahead wouldn't always be easy, but also knowing that, together, they had the strength to overcome anything. Elliot, once the arrogant billionaire, was now a man who had learned the true meaning of love, humility, and respect. And Sophia, the woman who had once slapped him, was now the one who held his heart. They had come full circle, from conflict to understanding, from regret to forgiveness, and from two people trying to protect themselves from love, to two people who were ready to give their hearts fully to each other. As they walked out of the cafe hand in hand, ready to start their new chapter, they both knew that they had found something rare, a love born not from perfection, but from growth, change, and a deep understanding of what it truly meant to care for another person.